Hey guys, in this episode of the YZ250F optimization series, I'm going to talk about the power tuning of this bike. And this is done with the stock gearing and the stock exhaust, by the way, in order to give you the most relatable information in case you've just purchased the bike and then you want to get as much out of the bike without buying a lot of extra parts, right? Pretty good idea. And then also I did a couple of things. I drilled holes in the airbox, like for the KTMs, they actually come from the factory with two different airbox covers, one with holes and one without. That is because when you have holes in the intake cover, you get more throttle response because of the added airflow. It's pretty simple. I'm going to be spending most of the time talking about how to use the Power Tuner app and specifically talk about the engine map that I've designed myself, inspired by Chris Kiefer's passive aggressive map for the bike, but I made it even better in my opinion, and I did something very unique that I don't think I've heard anybody else do on YouTube, and that is I combined it with a high idle setting. So you can adjust the idle down here, I'll show you in a second, which will make the roll-in speed for corners both higher, it's easier to carry high rolling speed if the bike doesn't have any engine brake. So this setup basically cancels out engine braking. It almost feels exactly like a two-stroke when you're rolling into corners. And this setup is also inspired by Ryan Dungey's riding technique. I don't know if you know this, but Ryan Dungey, he was hired by Roger DeCosta originally because Roger DeCosta, he saw his corner speed was exceptional. He maybe didn't put in the fastest lap time or won the most races at that time, but his corner speed was exceptional. So it has the idle adjuster down here. You just turn it clockwise to increase the idle, and you just keep increasing it until you find the idle speed that you are comfortable with on the track rolling into the turns. The goal is to have a high enough idle speed so that when you turn off the throttle, the bike doesn't lose a whole lot of speed. It only slows down a little amount, so you still almost maintain rolling with the same speed. So you only have a little bit of engine braking. It's very little. And of course it takes some time to get used to. But to get a little bit scientific about why it makes sense to minimize engine braking is that if you have a lot of engine braking, you're actually upsetting the suspension as soon as you turn off the throttle. Then all the weight comes forward and you overload the front end. And what Ryan Dungey did on a 450, he said that he practiced to coast around the turns with just 5% throttle. This is maybe okay if you have extremely good throttle control, but why not adjust the idle so that you can just turn off the throttle and then it does it by itself? It makes sense, right? So the approach to the corner where you're accelerating hard, that's why you need the bike to deliver the highest horsepower you can get out of it. So that's something you will see later when I go through the power tuner setup. That's the full throttle setting and how we did that. And then we get to the braking. On the next section, or after the braking, you have the roll section, and that's really where high idle speed helps you roll with minimal engine braking. And then on the acceleration part, my power tuner settings, they are really favoring controlling the throttle on the first part of the roll-on, where you're rolling on the throttle. If you're riding a slick track where it's slippery, or if you're riding a rut, or if you're riding a rut on a berm, if the berm starts to have ruts, it's a lot easier to stay in that rut if the throttle response is gentle on the first quarter throttle. Because if it's too snappy, as I set up my second map, by the way, I set it up to be super snappy off the bottom. That is not going to help on the technical tracks. You need throttle control with a gentle roll-on and a progressive power delivery on most technical tracks, right? It really favors exiting the corner with full control and minimal mistakes, just like Ryan Dungey would do. Okay, and my second map is the Snappy map, which is pretty close to Chris Kiefer's passive aggressive map, but also with some adjustments that I made to cancel out. I had some exhaust popping sounds from the exhaust, and I adjusted that to get rid of that basically. So now I'm going to show you the Power Tuner app and how I did these adjustments and how you do your own adjustments on the Power Tuner app for your own preferences. Also, if you have some exhaust popping, I'll tell you how to sort that out. So let's have a look at the Power Tuner app. So before I start talking about this map that I built, I first want to talk a little bit about general engine tuning and also my background in engine tuning. So first of all, I'm not a professional engine tuner, but I can take an engine apart completely, check the specifications and put it back together again so it works. And I also understand the principles that apply in how the engine works. And I also know how the principles of the Power Tuner app works, which is probably the most important for this video. And I also studied nanoscience, so I also know the basics of physics and chemistry and biology. And the reason I say that is because I actually saw a video from the Motor Academy with some random guy on the track that AJ, he borrowed his bike from. And then when AJ, he asked him what was done to the bike, the guy, he said it had a high compression piston, but it used normal fuel. So that is just an example of a guy who didn't understand physics or chemistry or anything of even what a high compression piston does. Because when you put a high compression piston in your bike, for example, you have to run a higher octane fuel. And also you cannot use the ignition setting that you see here on the Power Tuner app on the right side. So on the right side, there's this big box of numbers and that's all ignition timing. And you cannot run high numbers of ignition timing if you have a high compression piston. And certainly not if you don't know that you're supposed to use a high octane fuel with a high compression piston. So of course the reason I say this is kind of like to protect yourself from messing up your engine if you don't know what you're doing. So with all that out of the way, let's start talking about my corner speed map here. So what you're looking at here on the screen is two boxes, right? On your left side you see the fuel injection tuning, and on your right side you have a box for ignition timing. And as you may know, higher numbers on the ignition side means more power, because you're advancing the ignition timing means you're putting more stress on the engine as well. Basically making the spark plug create a spark earlier before the piston is all the way towards the top. And then on the fuel injection side, a higher number means more fuel, but that doesn't necessarily mean more power, as we'll talk about later. And then both boxes, they follow a simple format where you simply have the throttle position on the vertical axis and then engine RPMs on the horizontal axis. So that leads us to talk about the numbers that I've highlighted here with the green line, and they are horizontal, right? So that means it's about throttle position. And if you look carefully, you can see that it's for 20% throttle position and less. So up to 20% throttle position, that's what we're working with here. In other words, the numbers that we're adjusting here are the most important numbers for when you're rolling on the throttle on the first part of the turn, right around the apex area of the turn, where you're starting to apply the throttle and roll it on and increasing it until you're going full throttle out of the turn. And in most real life scenarios, actually the most important numbers to work with is what I've highlighted here in the red, because there's a correlation usually between the amount of throttle and the RPMs. So that means usually if you're riding lower RPMs, you're also usually working with less throttle. And usually if you're riding real high RPMs, then you're also usually using a high amount of throttle, right? Now let's get back to talking about the low amount of throttle, the first 20% of throttle, and then we will work our way up towards full throttle and talk about which numbers I use and why. So on the ignition side, you can see I've basically down-tuned the power all the way through all RPM ranges. And that is because I want to make it as smooth and controllable as possible. Remember, this is my map 1, my corner speed map, and then later we'll talk about my map 2, which is the aggressive and snappy map. Remember, lap times are made in the turns. So by doing this, the engine almost becomes like an enduro bike. It's really easy and smooth to control the first amount of throttle, and it doesn't lose traction or suddenly lose balance because it gets too wild. And as soon as you open the throttle past 20%, the power kicks in exactly when you need it. So I really like it. And then let's talk about what I did on the fuel injection side. If your bike is not making any popping sounds when you're off throttle and rolling fast, then I recommend you to actually run -1 in the whole row on the fuel side, or maybe 0, because it will run more dirty and it will have like a non-crisp throttle response if you add too much fuel, maybe even -2 or 3. You know, with fuel jetting, it's also a lot about climate and altitude and temperature and humidity, and I live in a tropical climate. So it depends a little bit on where you live, and maybe you also want to check if there's any air leaks or if you've drilled the airbox and stuff, because that stuff also may factor in. Okay, so now we've talked about the first amount of throttle up to 20% throttle, which is the most unique thing actually about my whole corner speed map and inspired by Ryan Dungey and what I just talked about in the beginning of the video. Now let's move on and talk about when you're rolling on the throttle to over 20%, and that's when you're right past the apex and you're starting to look towards the exit of the corner. Then you can see all the numbers on the ignition side, they are high, so they are around 8 to 10. And then with the more throttle you apply, the lower the numbers get. So when you're full throttle on full RPM, it's +5 instead of +10. And that's maybe a good idea if you want a little bit more reliability out of your engine. Because remember, when you're riding full RPM and full throttle, there's a lot of extra stress that comes with that. So at full RPM and full throttle, I chose to use +5 and +6, as you can see around that area, instead of plus 10, which you could do if you're going to try to win a championship or something, but for general practice, you don't need to try to squeeze that extra half horsepower or 1 horsepower out of your engine. And again, these numbers that I use above the low throttle positions, all of them, they are from Chris Kiefer's passive aggressive map. And Chris Kiefer, he built his map based on the Yamaha hard-hitting map. If you compare the two, you can see the numbers are almost exactly the same. Now I'll just put Yamaha's hard-hitting map on the screen. This is something that comes when you download the Yamaha Power Tuner app onto your phone. Then you can access this map directly and upload it to your bike. But you can see it's pretty different in terms of the fuel injection side. It's much leaner on the low throttle position. Now we're back to compare it to my corner speed map. So you can swap back and forth in the video if you want to compare the two. But in the big picture, both me and Chris Kiefer, we built our map based on Yamaha's hard-hitting map, and then modified it to get rid of the popping and to make it more controllable and more linear, basically. Okay, now I'll put my corner speed map on the screen without any drawings on it, so you can screenshot it if you want to try it, and then put in the numbers in your Power Tuner app and see how you like it. And also, of course, let me know if you find a way to make it even better. And if you wonder why I call it 4G in the screenshot, it's because it's the 4th generation of my own map. I did 3 generations before that where I tried different things. But now I'm pretty confident that this is the map I'm going to use for a long time, so let's go with that. Oh, and I want to share a quick note about Yamaha's own linear torque map. It doesn't run clean because it has way too much fuel injection. You can feel it's not crisp at all. In case you try it and you wonder what's going on, now you know. The only time that high fuel injection numbers are good is if you're struggling with overheating. Because when you're running leaner, it usually runs more crisp and clean, and it usually produces more power. But in some cases, if you're riding in the desert in 50 degrees or whatever, 120 degrees Fahrenheit, I don't know, then you might want to consider it. Now let's end the video with talking about the aggressive map, and I set that up to be map number 2. You know, when you push the button and it turns on the blue light, that's map 2, and that's what we're looking at here. And the purpose of this map is to use it whenever the track is fresh built and not too technical and very good traction. Then you can have a snappy map where you want a lot of instant power when you want to get out of the turn quick. And then later, if the track gets ruddy or slippery or technical, then you can just push the button and go back to your standard map that is way more controllable and more precise. So what I did here, if you look at the numbers on the right side in red, you can see I just increased the numbers almost to the highest setting, so around 9. And then on the fuel side, I went +1 instead of +2. So I went a little bit leaner to give it a little bit more power and a little bit more crisp down there. But it's pretty simple. It's only the bottom I changed. Everything else is the same. Actually, I think it would be really fun and interesting to try to just put in number 10 everywhere on the ignition side to make it as aggressive as possible and see if there was a noticeable difference. And also try to do a lap time comparison if there's a smooth and freshly rebuilt track. That would make a lot of sense. I mean, if it's half a second faster or 1 second faster, it would definitely make sense to use it for racing and then use this setting for practice. So now we've talked about the maps, and I'll end the video by talking about traction control and launch control just very quickly, because I could probably spend the whole video talking about that too. But I chose not to use the traction control because of 2 reasons. Reason number 1, with traction control on, you cannot lift the front of the bike if you endo through the air and you need to panic rev to lift it up. You cannot lift it up as fast. Of course you can, but there's a big delay on it. However, traction control does work. They made it really work well. But you can actually control the bike just as well if you use my smooth corner speed map. You can have the same sort of control by just using good throttle control if you're an experienced rider. So that was my second reason, that you can just control it by hand by setting up your first map as my corner speed map, and that will also even make you better in the turns, so why not? And now let's talk about the launch control. So launch control is basically a temporary RPM limiter that you use for race starts, and then once you upshift to 3rd gear, it will disable the temporary RPM limiter. And it also retards the ignition, by the way, so it puts out less horsepower. So the idea is it's supposed to help you not wheelie. But what I found is I just found I could control it way better by controlling the clutch and the power myself. And I basically honestly felt like I was going slow as a turtle when I was using the launch control. I felt like I couldn't go fast if I really wanted to. So I would not want to rely on this launch control for a race, because I just feel like I wouldn't get in front. Maybe that'll change when I test it more and I learn to use it better. But until then, I'll just stay old school and just do it manually and use my clutch control and throttle control. And that can also, you know, always be instantly adjust it to the track conditions. Because if the track conditions change and you have a certain setting for the launch control, then you're gonna mess up your race start simply because you didn't have time to change the setting. Because it seems like the setting has to be perfect in order for it to work on a given condition. But anyways, I'm new to launch control, so I'm not an expert on that. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a really long video, sorry for that, but I just felt like I had to say everything that I've learned from it, or at least most of it, so you can make use of it. Because I've definitely benefited from having the Yamaha Power Tuner app and learning how to use it. There's now 2 ways you can train with me personally. The first one is you can join the Fast Club, as I talked about in another video already. And that is done by clicking the join button and then selecting Fast Club Online Coaching. Then you can train with me online and I'll review your riding footage. And then I'll give you a personalized program on how to improve your technique based on your current level of riding technique. And the second way you can train with me is in person physically, where you sign up for a coaching package where we work on everything from your riding technique, your fitness and your nutrition, so your diet plans, and also things such as how to maintain and set up your bike. And if you like riding off-road and enduro, you will also be able to ride with me in beautiful nature. And actually you can also work on a lot of your riding techniques while you're doing enduro. And this is something I teach that is a bit unique compared to other coaches, is that actually when you're riding enduro, you have a lot more time to focus on your technique without riding at high intensity. So if that sounds cool, look at the information in the description. Send me a message on the email in my About section on my YouTube channel or fitcamp5.com, or follow me on Instagram, FastCoachToby. In any case, thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the future for training, either in person or in Fast Club Online Coaching. Thank you so much for watching and see you on the next one. To watch the full version of my advanced riding videos and support the development of this channel, click the join button below and become a member. And thereby you will get access to exclusive videos where I go through the most advanced skill levels and also explaining things from a physics standpoint, because I have a background in science and thereby studying physics, so I'm able to explain actual riding technique and the mechanics of riding, also bike setup, in a way that you don't see on many other channels. Also, I share my own step-by-step methods on how I track my own progress and riding technique development. So if you're interested in that, consider becoming a member and clicking the join button. And if you like tropical island holidays, visit fitcamp5.com for my 2-time TripAdvisor award-winning training camp, where we train fitness and action sports together while learning to live a healthy lifestyle and, maybe most importantly, have fun at the same time. And if you're really serious about improving yourself, you should definitely check out my full online courses, where I share step-by-step programs on how I developed my own routines over the last 12 years as a CEO, working in 4 different countries, while being a successful competitive athlete with more than 20 years of experience in fitness and nutrition. Check the link in the description for that. And in any case, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, be awesome, believe in yourself, and see you on the next one.